who is Deputy Vice Chancellor of Curtin University in Australia. King Chow, who is Acting Dean of Students, Director of the Center for the Development of the Gifted and Talented, and Program Director of the Bachelor of Science in Individualized Interdisciplinary Major Program at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong. Kin Ho Chan, who's a faculty member in Integrated Science at the remarkable experiment that's taking place at Fulbright University of Vietnam in Ho Chi Minh City. And my dear colleague, Jim Myers, who is Associate Provost for International Education and Global Programs here at Rochester Institute of Technology. And my name is Jim Hall, and I'm the Dean of University Studies and Executive Director of the School of Individualized Study here at RIT. Even though we're gathering virtually today, we'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that the Rochester Institute of Technology campus, located in Rochester, New York, is on the traditional territory of the Onondaga, guaranteed to them by the Treaty of Canandaigua in 1994. They are one of the 6 nations that make up the sovereign Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We begin with the land acknowledgement as an opportunity to honor the land on which RIT was built and to recognize the unique relationship that the indigenous people of this area have with the land. Attendees are requested, please keep your microphones muted throughout the panelist presentations. You can keep your camera active, but please be aware that we are recording this session. So if you're not comfortable being seen for any reason, please feel free to mute your video. We would like to note and thank our American Sign Language interpreters, Cheryl Bavard and Gail Macias, for joining us today and providing access to our deaf and hard of hearing attendees. Our interpreters will be spotlighting their video. For those not using ASL interpreting, we recommend using Gallery View. We'll hold a question and answer session after all the panelists are presented. Questions can be sent in the Zoom chat throughout the session to all, or privately if you prefer to Lindsay McGrath. We'll be compiling your questions for discussion during the question and answer. And we also invite attendees to join in the discussion during the Q&A, but we ask that you use the hand raising tool. This is typically down in the bottom right under the reactions button in order for us to orderly shape the conversation. And on behalf of RIT, we really appreciate you giving us this time and working with us today. This is our first attempt at a Global Convergence conference, and we're really excited to see where this might go in the future. I wanted to briefly go back to the land acknowledgement. This is new business for RIT, new justice work for RIT, consistent with comprehensive work we've been doing as an institution in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what's really remarkable and really pertinent to the conversation tonight is this began as a conversation that took place when we hosted Simon Fuller, Curtin University's Aboriginal Elder in Residence here at RIT. And we had terrific conversation around the table about the relative places that American universities and Australian universities were in meeting their treaty obligations and acknowledging the relationship to Indigenous communities and thinking about truth and reconciliation process. So this was a meal conversation. It was informal. It wasn't part of a larger programmatic effort, but it really speaks to the ineffable impacts of global exchange and the kinds of impacts that they can have on institutional life. I joked this week that this whole panel was really just an excuse for me to get friends back together that I had not seen in a couple of years. And that felt self-indulgent. But in other ways, I think it speaks directly to what is at stake here. We have big challenges ahead of us in imagining what the post-COVID university looks like, what global travel looks like in an era of pandemics, what global travel should be in an era of climate change crisis, what global exchange can be in an area when all universities around the world are involved in the process of reevaluating resource allocation and trying to sort out how they will become sustainable institutions. So again, I'm looking forward to this reflection tonight. I'm looking forward to the remarkable expertise that we have around the table, the diverse perspectives. We have senior administrators, we have faculty, we have folks directly involved in global education, and we have folks involved in the student affairs mission as well. So it's a great gathering of talent. So let me turn it over first to my good colleague, Jill Downey from Curtin University, to talk just briefly about Curtin's relative position in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for gathering together like this, and I'm really excited to present here today and to bring to you some perspectives from Curtin University. I'd like to share my screen, and so if you'll just bear with me, can you see the screen in front of you there? Has it come up all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on, or I'm meeting on Noongar land. It's the land of the Aboriginal Southwest Australians, and I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging leaders. You'll see through my presentation, like on this slide, some wonderful Aboriginal art that was actually done by children of the stolen generation back in the 1950s. But to our topic today, perspectives on the post-COVID era and global convergence. It is interesting, I think, as we sort of look at where we're all positioned and so forth. I'm in Perth, Western Australia. We've got at Curtin University about 58,000 students, and we're a fairly large university, comprehensive offerings, including a medical school. And we're the #1 university for student demand from high school students leaving the school setting. About 4,000 staff and a single site employer, the largest in Western Australia, and a $1 billion budget. I thought I'd just start a little bit with where we are in the Australian higher education sector at the moment. Through the pandemic, the government has made a lot of policy changes as well, which has been pretty challenging for us, to be honest, on top of COVID. So I think looking at what does it mean for us post-COVID, we're certainly without international students here still in Australia. International students haven't been able to travel here since last March. So that's been very difficult for us, understandable given COVID. And in my state, we're largely COVID-free. We've only had 3 COVID cases this year and a couple of quick lockdowns for 3 days each. Last year, we were locked down for a couple of weeks and a small number of cases. But it's largely because our international borders have been closed. What we've seen, like all of you, is that the technological revolution has just expanded. So everyone is using technology, and I think we've all become much more innovative as a result of that. We do see still learner and employer expectation changing, and our Australian government has funded higher education certificates for the population. So these are short courses for what we would call units, you might call courses in a semester of study, and they're funded those to get people back into employment and the economy going again. They have made a lot of changes, as I said, during this pandemic, and the Job Ready Challenges legislation has meant we've had reduced funding in this environment as well, in addition to no additional help for our employees where other parts of the Australian workforce have actually been supported. So the government's been pretty hard on higher ed. We're focused very much on rural and remote from a policy perspective, and also on work integrated learning. But in terms of how we've responded to these challenges from an international perspective, in some respects, we've been quite fortunate. We do have 4 other campuses that sit offshore away from Perth. So we've got a campus in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Miri, in Dubai, and in Mauritius. So in lots of ways, we already have a hybrid model of learning where we gather our international students at these other campuses and have a one Curtin approach to how we work in the world. So although in some ways the Vice-Chancellor and other senior exec sit at the Perth campus, we have a Pro-Vice-Chancellor in each of these campuses, and we do work as a one Curtin approach. So the experience that you get in Perth is equivalent to what you have on the other campuses. This has in some ways really assisted us during this pandemic, because although in all of those locations from time to time there's been lockdowns and difficulties, students have been able to travel internationally to these locations and still study with us, even though they haven't been with us in Australia. When I asked those campuses what it's been like for them during the pandemic, you can see a variety of responses, I guess. In Singapore, they've been locked down a little bit, but they've mostly done really quite well. In terms of the campus in Dubai, they've had quite high cases. They've been locked down sort of a couple of times. We've found great innovation and great strength amongst our staff and our students. And all of the campuses report a greater use of technology, more innovation by staff, but they also say that there's some negatives. You know, industry relationships and partnerships have stalled in the way that Jim introduced the segment. I think that's been isolating for all of us. And in some places like Malaysia and other campuses, including our own in Perth, there's been a real need for professional development for our staff and coaching and training. And staff have reported that real feeling of isolation. So I think for our staff and students, whether that's at the Perth campus or at one of our international campuses, that sense of belonging has been really hard to maintain, and that sense of community. And I think as we go forward, that's really what we're focusing on. When we look at the post-pandemic and the consolidation that's actually happening at the Perth campus, we've had to make some quite big changes in terms of financial, financial impact's been quite large. So we've had a restructure of staff. We've lost some 350 contract staff, and we've lost many, many casual staff. So we've had some major restructures and consolidation of some of the schools in our university. We're really looking at a very different return post-COVID. Lectures are being replaced by large group collaboration sessions, and we plan to completely move away from lectures. We're moving away from big exam halls and face-to-face exams to much more authentic assessment. We were well and truly on this journey anyway, but COVID has really hastened this. And I think the conversation about our investment in digital transformation has really increased at Curtin. We have put all of our student services online. We've got telehealth for counselling and health services, but we recognise we need a very big investment in this space. And that's going to require the reskilling and upskilling of our staff in a major way. We've done pulse checks, as I'm sure many of you have, of our students on the way through the last sort of 14 months. As I said, that sense of belonging has been overwhelmingly the response that staff and students have talked about, really not feeling connected through the online environment as much as in the face-to-face environment. And first-year students, we find, have been hardest hit. We did come back last August to face-to-face teaching, but still this year we have more online courses because we've still got a couple of thousand students who are studying with us in various parts of the world, and they can't come onto our shores, as I said, so they're studying online. We've put a lot of supports in place for our students as much as we possibly can, hardship scholarships, housing scholarships, and we've changed quite a few of our entry pathways. We already had more than our ATAR, which is our tertiary entrance exam, to come in, enabling pathways and so forth. But we changed our policies and have kept that in place, and early offers for our students in Year 11 so that they know that they can come into university and we will find alternate ways if they've really struggled during the pandemic. We've launched a very big Students as Partners initiative that was underway pre-COVID, but I think it's made it even more important, and students are really wanting to engage across a range of issues, including the environment, climate change. Should we be traveling all over the world in the way that we have, pollution, all sorts of topics, and we're engaging with our students on those, but also in the co-creation of curricula. And like other places in the world, I think work practices have changed forever. We probably have about 20% less people on campus this year than we did pre-COVID. And that's even though we're back face-to-face on campus. We have increased our learning partnerships, both with schools and reaching out and making sure that we're much better connected to the schools across our state, but also our industry partnerships, I think, always strong for Curtin, but increasingly important. Some industries have done better than others throughout COVID, but we do see that connection. And certainly, as I mentioned at the outset, our government is encouraging much more work-integrated learning, much more commercialisation in our research. And that's really, I guess, in a good way, making industry and the university come together. The vocational sector also is another sector where we're reaching out to. Our edX partnership has been important during COVID, and through 1 week in COVID, we increased our learners by 7,000 enrolments. We had 80,000 new learners last year, and that just continues to steadily increase, and we partner with industry a lot in our edX offerings. We've also looked at new offerings around Curtin credentials, and we've launched those this year, and that's for our graduates to upskill, reskill and cross-skill with small modular learning, which we can stack into traditional graduate certificates and master's programs. And I'm happy to talk more about that if people are interested. I think as we go forward, there are lots of positives, even though it's still challenging for us, but more so for other parts of the world. And we see the terrible things that are happening in India and other countries with third waves at the moment. We are, I think, strong because of our hybrid model and our global campuses. But on our WA campus, our international enrolments are down by about 22%. So that's a big change for the university. Our undergraduates and our postgraduates have come back in droves, and that's largely been driven by the Australian economy. When the economy is a little less robust, people come into university. So we're seeing good growth there. And we're really embarked on a virtual campus to really reignite that sense of belonging. We're very fortunate. Western Australia is the fastest growing economy in the world at the moment, and we're essentially COVID-free. On the east coast of Australia, it's pretty similar. We don't have much COVID. The Victorian state suffered the most with extensive lockdowns late last year. But, you know, by and large, as an island and the way that we've isolated ourselves, we've been very fortunate from a health and economical perspective. But we have missed our engagement with our colleagues around the world in that face-to-face sense. And with that, I'll finish up and happy to take questions at the very end of everyone's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill. King, let me turn it over to you.
Yes, please. Okay, I'll share my slides. All right, can you see it? Okay, all right.
There we go.
So thanks for having me here to join this panel discussion. I think it's great to be here to share with you some of our experience in Hong Kong. All right, so I just want to make sure that you can see the slide.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I'm going to spend a bit of time to brief you about actually what's going on in Hong Kong. I think that first of all, HKUST is a university. This year actually is our 30th anniversary. So we're relatively young in that sense, but then actually we have gone through quite a bit in the past few decades. Now, I want to end this presentation later on to talk about some idea about the model of how a university is going to be run. But basically, the background is that UST is a university with about 15,000 students, 10,000 undergrad, 5,000 graduate students. So we've been focusing on science and technology quite a bit. Our strength is really in science, technology, as well as business, not so much on social science and humanity. And for among other students, many of them actually they are first generation college attenders. So in a way, I think that this is the way that this university is built, so that actually we want to nurture the communities focusing on this advancing technology so that to make the economy a bit better in this part of the world. Now, but then at the same time, I think internationalization as well as having students to have the exposure to a wide range of activity. It is what we really aim for. So we want to make sure that the student would not have the kind of a hurdle they need to overcome, because there's a very standardized format of how classes being delivered, as well as how they are organizing their activities. So we want to honor diversity. I think that's really one of the point. And the key is that we take advantage of a lot of the opportunity to reach out. Now, certainly when we talk about internationalization, exchange has always been a discussion. A lot of collaboration has been going on. But then I think over the past 8 or 9 years or so, actually, we've been actively engaging in multiple platforms in order to reach out. So here are some of our partners, including edX, Coursera, Minerva, and actually UST is setting up our own virtual university to deliver courses for other institutions as well as the high schools. So with that, actually, we have quite a bit of experience using the online education approach. So with that, in fact, we have been delivering quite a number of courses. We have been constantly offering about 60 MOOC courses online. And then currently we have roughly about 3.5 to 4 million students who have already enrolled in our courses. And that actually gives us quite a bit of experience. Now, all this come together. When this COVID came, we were primed with it with an unfortunate incident. Many of you may know that in Hong Kong, actually, we have some social unrest in the 2019. And in fact, in the month of November and December in 2019, our campus actually has been affected. And so therefore, at that time, we have already switched online for about 2 months. Primed us for the preparation of the COVID, not that we know about it, but then at the same time, it makes all our faculty very much ready for switching into an online mode. And so therefore, before the COVID hit in January 2020, we have already organized a large number of workshops for our colleagues to get them prepared. So therefore, within a very short period of a month or two, we essentially switched all our courses. More than 95% of our courses have been switched online. And so I want to pose one of the questions later on we may be able to discuss. People constantly ask us that, wait, what happened when the pandemic's over? Whether we will continue to use this kind of online mode. Our prediction now is that probably about 30 to 40% of our courses would still actively be using this kind of a platform. So I think that this is a direction I believe that many institutions would go forward along this line. But at the same time, as I think Jill as well as Jim talked about, with the COVID coming, we do have a problem. It's about traveling. And we would have a problem sending students over, and we have a hard time having students coming over. Although we haven't really been hit hard by the international recruitment. So I think the number of international students reaching our campus is still very high. Right now, about 20% of our student body is from international, from various states or countries. But in terms of exchange, while in the past, we were able to achieve roughly about 45% of our students. They would have at least one term, 4 months exchange to other institutions. That basically came to a stop since last spring. And with that, we actively pursue another venue, which is doing virtual student exchange, allowing students to take courses in other institutions. At the same time, we allow other students to come to UST to take courses. And I believe that I think RIT have a number of students studying at UST too. In total, actually, we were able to gear that up with a good number, not to the full scale as the full exchange, about half of the enrollment with exchange students going in and out. So I think that is quite remarkable. And in the process that we've been collaborating with a number of alliances, including the Asia Pacific Research University, Alliance of East Asia Research University, and all these, we have a lot of partnership. And we also set up bilateral partnerships to set up exchange opportunity. Now, so in that case, in fact, we find the merit of doing that. Our student would be able to expose to a large number of courses, which does not require them to go through all this physical transportation, migrations, or even relocation. Now, that gives our student a lot of flexibility. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Now, at the same time, we did not really stop interacting with a lot of other institutions. And I think that starting from last April or so, we've been organizing all this global webinar with our partner institution. Usually we do it like a 2 at a time. We organize having faculties with common interests come together, and we hold all this webinar almost like every month. And overall, actually, we have hit more than 40,000 participants in all this webinar. So in a way, I think that's the way that we continue to reach out and bring in colleagues with similar expertise to talk about issues of related areas. Now, at the same time, as we identify that the students, if they are not really coming into the class, they are studying online, there are other things actually that we've been missing. For example, student counseling. So we essentially switched our entire student support online. And so we use all this online counseling service. We expanded our counseling team to provide a service. Indeed, I think that we are offering service even for students, our international students who are staying in their home country, including very initially when was broken out in Wuhan. We have a number of students in Wuhan. Actually, we're providing service for them. At the same time, how about job opportunity? Now, all the international internship, actually, they were stopped. But we were able, with the support from the government, we increased the number of internship offer locally, and we expanded our virtual internship. Many of you may know that a number of institutions, financial institution or industry or so, in fact, they don't hesitate to offer this like a virtual internship. And our students continue to engage in that. And so based on that number, in fact, the number of internship we offer in the past year is more than the year before. So for the student, actually, they did not really lose out too much from that. Now, I want to bring us back to one of the potential direction. I noticed that actually when we talk about internationalization, a lot of time this physical barrier, geographical isolation has been a problem. But then now, because of this digital transformation and the building up of various platforms, we have other ways to reach out to each other. The question is that whether we will be able to break this economic divide, whether we will be able to really break that cultural separation, or most importantly, I think it's psychological barrier. And I want to hit on that particular part. So I want to bring us back to think about actually what a university is really like. Very typically for university, we have a fixed number of credit, and then you organize a lot of things according to the major, but then you provide a number of other activities, you call it enrichment activities for them, including having co-op, exchange, student activities, competitions, internship, community engagement, and they do research. Now, in the past, before COVID, we are constantly thinking about a bilateral interaction, right? But then sometimes we need to think about something. It may sound silly, but I want to bring it up for some discussion later on. We were having a lot of communication going on with one university, another university. We identify specific area. We try to collaborate. We want to break that barrier. We engage each other in participation in specific projects, specific activity. But now, suddenly we notice that, well, with all this digital platform available, in fact, we can expand quite a bit. And we need to turn back introvertly and ask ourselves what actually a university is really about. So let me put forward in the following way. Do we really need to have our students taking all these credits within our institution with only a small number of the credits taken elsewhere? I believe that the answer is easy to get, is no. And so if we have two universities and we have all this activity going on, the question is that, would we be able to share a lot of this activity openly? Now, the hurdle, as I pointed out, is really the psychological barrier, where the institution would regard that this is a degree coming from my institution, so I want my student to take most of the courses coming from us. If we don't have that psychological barrier, essentially, we can have a lot of courses being shared. Now, we need to work out a financial model and how to channel resources or so. But on the other hand, we can easily diversify the number of courses offered, diversify the kind of activity offered, as long as we recognize each of the other units as a partner units. And right now, actually, we are negotiating with some institution to set up that kind of like a partnership so that we can form some sort of like a consortium to share a lot of these activities. So in a way, what it allows us to do is that, why do students need to come to our institution to study locally? So that is really, I think, the hard core of it is that we may need to like redefine what a physical university is really for. What are you providing? Why do they need to come to your campus to take courses there? There must be certain activity, certain environment, certain network, your alumni, your faculty, that make it so attractive that the people want to come there, or maybe be the economy or the local setting industry. So these are the key issues. And so in a way, if we can take this opportunity as a way to go forward, then we should look into ourselves to look at actually what we're offering. Instead of constantly thinking about how a university was run in the past, we may need to look further and see what makes our university unique so that the identity will stand out. So I think I will stop here, and I believe that we can talk a little bit more on this particular topic.
Thank you, Ken. Kin Ho, we'll have you go next.
Hi, let me share my screen. Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
My screen? Okay, my name is Kin Ho Chan. I'm from Fulbright University in Vietnam. And like when Jim introduced us, we are a very young university. We actually just started 3 years ago. We are located in right here, over here in Vietnam, Southeast Asia, relative Hong Kong is over there, Singapore, Australia, and I even managed to get New York State on the very western edge here on this map. We started, like I said, in 2018. 2018-19 was our co-design year, and 15 faculty members led by the founding faculty, Ryan W. Talbot, and 53 students recruited from all across Vietnam, from different socioeconomic status, different regions, and even some different ethnic groups within Vietnam. And we together, we worked to co-design virtually all the different aspects and components of a university, including the academic curriculum, courses, course prototypes, academic policies, and even faculty governance. And our first academic year, was in the 2019, 2020. And halfway through that year, we all know what happened with COVID. So we don't really have a lot of history in terms of what we did, what our strategies were before COVID versus after COVID. I'm showing this slide from our university website. From the very outset, from the very beginning, studying abroad and exchange programs is a key component of the university. We are an independent university. We are not we're not a branch of another U.S. institution or another international university, but we do have some partners like Harvard University, Bard College, Dartmouth. The intention is to extend and strengthen these partnerships over the next years. And when students first came to Fulbright, our promise was that in their third year, we would be able to offer some international exchange programs with other universities. COVID certainly put a snag into that plan. But before I go further, I just want to give a little bit of context about how Vietnam handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Our first case was confirmed in January 23rd. By February 1st, the government shut down all the schools for 2-week announcements at a time, but it ended up lasting about 3 months. And so by May, all the schools were opened back up. So the whole country basically went through about 3 months of online learning, remote learning. And in a developing country, we saw the digital gap as a major issue, especially for the high school students. And we actually had to do a lot to provide help to those students who are from more rural area to make sure that they have some way to get online access. But as a result of those, what I call a hypervigilant approach to combating COVID, Vietnam has really largely been spared of the more dire consequences of COVID compared to the rest of the world. And notice that we shut down even though there were only a couple handful of cases in Vietnam, and that really brought it under control. We were able to open around May. There was a second wave in the summer of 2020, but that was controlled, and we were able to open all schools in September. So, and we have been doing in person for since September 2020, right? And so our experience in Vietnam is it may be a little different from the rest of the world. While we adjusted to online learning for about 3 months, our students never got used to it. Our faculty never really got used to it. We experimented with a number of different tools, but by far, our students and our faculty are still have a strong preference for online learning. So some of the questions that King brought up in the previous session, we will come back to later. Post-COVID, I shouldn't say post-COVID, but as a result of adjusting to COVID, one of the things that we did was we developed a new position called Partnership Development Manager, and we hired one of our existing staff at Fulbright, Vincent, to take over this responsibility of developing partnerships, and also to really rethink and slow down and really reframe how we want to develop partnerships during COVID. So in addition to higher education institutions, kind of like what Curtin University did, Vincent spent a lot of time developing education-centered partnerships with our industry partners and corporate partners. By now, we have a total of about 50 formal partnerships between Fulbright and other institutions, all developed in the past 2 years, including with Princeton University, Dartmouth College, Stanford Medical School, their CARES program. And we are also in MOUs pending with Bard College, Olin College, Pitzer College. And notice that a lot of our partners out of these 50 are actually internship partners who have many are international corporations, some regional that have a presence in Vietnam, working with Fulbright to develop internship opportunities for students. Another thing that Fulbright did in this adjustment to COVID is Fulbright being so new, we only have about 300 students right now. We started with 53, went to about 125 in our second year, and approximately doubled again in our third year to 300. And we don't have international students yet, even though we have had a few applicants from Cambodia and Laos, our immediate neighbors to our west. But we don't really have international students. Instead, there are a lot of Vietnamese students who are international students to universities overseas, right? And they cannot go to their institutions, right? So Fulbright developed a visiting student program in the summer of 2020 to provide the opportunity for some of those students who are stuck in Vietnam to come to Fulbright and enroll in our courses. And we try to work with them to with their home institutions to see if we can develop agreements for credit transfer. And a number of students came, but even though not all of them, many of those students were able to get their institutions to accept our credits. And I think I don't have the exact number, but out of about 150 new students that were accepted in 2020, we have about 10% of those students as part of our visiting student program. So what is next in Vietnam? In Vietnam, we expect some form of travel restriction for an extended period of time, just because vaccine is still not widely available and probably will not be for a while. And the government, being hypervigilant, has really stopped tourism and incoming students from foreign countries. The only people who can come in are those who with diplomatic clearance or skilled workers. So whatever we do in the future, we have to work within this restriction. However, because students in Vietnam really haven't experienced an extended period of time of interruption or disruption to their in-person learning, students' demand for in-person international exchange programs will remain strong. All of our students, virtually all of our students, would still like to go to a university overseas to do part of their undergraduate education. We also see faculty exchange as a possible alternative that may have fewer barriers, because Vietnam does allow skilled professionals with expertise to come in. There is a 2-week quarantine period, but while students cannot get in, faculty can. So we are we have some visiting scholars coming in starting September 2021, and to provide expertise in areas that our current faculty do not have expertise in. In terms of key opportunities for dialogue, I'm very much interested in what King just shared in the previous session, and the question about what is the purpose of a university? What is the purpose of a physical university, and how do we serve students in the post-COVID era? Because our experience in Vietnam is a little different. In my personal experience, I went to a small liberal arts college in upstate New York, and then went to graduate school in a large university at Purdue. And then I spent the next 16 years teaching at a small liberal arts college. I am a strong advocate for the small liberal arts college experience. And so I want to bring the question of how important is the sense of belonging, like Jill brought up earlier, and the sense of community of learners and scholars in this post-COVID international education world. What about students who choose to be mostly online without really thinking about the question of sense of belonging and a sense of community of learners? How do we serve them? And how much do we really still care about that? And is this psychological barrier only affecting how we think about university, or does it also actually affect student outcomes? So those are some of the questions I'm very interested in. In addition, equity, inclusion, and diversity in an international context is something that I think those of us who are interested in international education and international partnership can really provide some important insights to help each other think about these issues. And I've only been at Fulbright for 3 years. Most of my education was I went undergraduate, graduate, and my academic career has been in the US. And now being in Vietnam at an international university, what does academic freedom look like in countries that have really haven't confronted this issue in the same way that many universities have in the past, in the West especially? What does it look like, and what do we want it to look like? And those are some questions that I'm very interested in discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kin Ho. Jim Myers, over to you.
Thank you, Jim.
As Jim's getting set, let me just remind participants that they can leave questions in the chat, and we'll shift into conversation mode very soon.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to be quite quick. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who's come to join us this evening, and I certainly want to thank our panelists who are joining us from around the world. This has been a most extraordinary time, I think, in higher education generally, but certainly in the world of international education. We have, I think, both, at least in our case at RIT, we've played a role in sort of helping cope with the impacts of COVID. I think we've had some ways of sharing knowledge across boundaries. Like Curtin, we have campuses on 4 continents, and up in our main campus in Rochester is about a little over 16,000, almost 17,000 students, and then we have 4 campuses outside of the United States, one in Kosovo, one in Croatia, 2 locations in Croatia, a campus in Dubai, and a campus in China, and we have just right around 3,000 students at those overseas campuses. So, and when the virus started, when the outbreak started in China, I remember writing my boss, Dr. Gramberg, the provost at RIT, saying, you know, we're monitoring this. And little did we know that, I think I did that in late December, and little did we know that by March, we would be scrambling in some ways to figure out how we were going to continue our semester. And it really was sort of, for us at RIT, sort of 4 distinct periods of time. We had sort of the coping transition time of spring semester of last year, and then summer. And I'll talk a little bit about those. And then really the start of this fall and the spring semester. And the campus experience in Rochester has been very different from our international experience. Like in the case of Curtin, like Jill was describing, our campus in Dubai was quite severely affected early on, and has, although done a wonderful job, the country has done a wonderful job with vaccines, they've had these surges across time that have forced really the campus to go pretty much 100% remotely. In the midst of also opening up a brand new campus that we have there that will accommodate about 2,000 students. So they were really feeling the weight of it. Our campuses in Croatia and Kosovo also sort of coping with the realities of the COVID situation in Europe. Kosovo was a little bit sort of behind the curve in terms of its impact, but also in terms of being probably one of the poorer countries in Europe. In not having some of the healthcare resources and infrastructure, was also struggling to sort of cope with it once it came. And then frankly, our China campus sort of was the first to sort of come around and be ready to be open again, and did that really quite successfully, I think, in a very almost normalized fashion here this fall. We did not put our faculty on the ground in China in the fall. We did everything remote delivery pretty much from the United States. So we had this experience in the spring of just sort of scrambling to get everything together. And I think as an institution, RIT has done an amazing job. The spring experience was one of trying to figure out how to finish the semester. As we went into summer, I think we found that we could do some really creative and unique things. And one of the things that we discovered is that we combined sort of our and desire to offer more things online with a good marketing effort and a good financial package. And we had probably one of the best enrollment summers that we've ever had, if not the best. And we're applying sort of the same model again this summer, and I think we're going to see a very similar kind of outcome. Once we got sort of through summer, the other thing that we did in the summer, I think that was kind of an innovative thing that emerged out of COVID, is that we were quite concerned about the experience that high schoolers that were headed into the university experience, the kind of things that how they were feeling about their spring semesters as they wrap things up, and were they going to be college ready and that kind of thing. And we started something called First Class Academy, which was an opportunity for high school students to sort of who are coming to be with us, to get a leg up on their studies and sort of stay active, because they were very isolated, stay active and engaged, and so get a start really with their RIT studies. And this First Class Academy, I think, again, a really innovative thing that I think helped a lot of students get started at RIT, something that we probably would not have done in the absence of sort of the COVID situation. So right off the bat, going into summer, I feel like the university adapted really quickly under our senior leadership, particularly our provost and president, and a good team of people who pulled everything together. I thought it was really terrific. And yes, Sandy Connolly, I see your note there, and I should, of course, make mention of your great work in that regard. So going into the fall, I think there was a lot of concern about fall semester. A lot of unknown, in terms of if you followed what was sort of happening with COVID here in the US. We don't have the advantage of sort of having a national health policy. We have 50 different approaches to this, each state taking their own approach, and New York State was really impacted. And our governor became sort of a rock star around the country for his news conferences, where he and the president sort of went at each other about how to best handle this thing. He set some limits on us. One was if you got more than 100 students with positive COVID results in a 14-day period, you had to go to 100% online. It didn't matter how big you were. If you were an institution like us with 17,000 students, or a little smaller liberal arts college someplace, 100 was 100, and you had to make the transition. We never got there. Luckily, we made it all the way through fall. We got close, but we made it all the way through fall semester, really offering as much as we could in a face-to-face environment. Our biggest constraint was space, and that was but we got through it. The student experience in that, I think, and this is where I'll talk more about our international campuses. One of the things we were able to do, being a global university, is that in the fall, we started about 165 students remote start. So they did 100% of their classes online, and it was about 100 grad students and about 65 undergraduate students who did their programs online, and that's across a number of programs at the university. I think something like 45 different programs were represented there. We also started within that group. We started about 22 at our China campus. And so this really goes to, I think, King's question about the importance of a physical space, whether or not we need something like that. We started those students there because, quite frankly, they wanted to be someplace physically different than in their parents' living room, sitting online taking classes. They wanted to be with their peers. They wanted to start classes normally, so to speak, even though they were taking all of their classes remotely from different programs across RIT. So they specifically went to the Weihai campus really to be in the company of each other, because there wasn't RIT faculty there teaching them. The RIT faculty were teaching them all remotely. And I would say that was a pretty successful thing. I think our hope is, and many of them still hoping to come to Rochester here in the coming year. But for the most part, that went, I think, quite well. The other thing I'll say about the student experience between the fall and the spring has been I think both on the Rochester campus and at all of our international campuses, and for those students who are taking their courses remotely, I do think it has been an incredibly difficult thing for their emotional mental health. I think we know that our students are feeling isolated. We know that our students are wanting to be connected. I think that there's a similar sense among our faculty that there's a desire to be connected again in a more sort of face-to-face way. That's not to say I don't think that we're shunning any of the innovations and opportunities that have been created as a result of the technology-mediated instructional experiences that we've really had to adopt here in the last year and a half. Having said that, I think, and to our credit, our provost, Dr. Gramberg, set up a committee of faculty and administrators across campus really to look at two areas. One was the policy area in terms of what policies need to change or will likely need to change in the post-COVID environment. I think this was a group probably of about 35 or more people who were part of that discussion. And then the other group was really to set up and look at educational technology and the instructional environment and what's that going to look like. And what recommendations need to be thought about going forward out of COVID. Really searching for that question of, what innovations did we have and how could we take advantage of them? I think that very collaborative, sort of open approach shed light on a number of things. One is that I don't think that what we experienced in the sort of in the fall and in the spring of this year, I don't think any of our faculty felt that these were sort of the ideal experiences. These were not something that anyone thought was sort of the perfect way to do this. I do think, and I would count myself among some of those folks, that we see the opportunity, and we see that there are certain advantages of using both 100% asynchronous instruction, high flex models, all these adaptive approaches. There's certainly enthusiasm for that, but I think at the same time we did it on the fly. We all tried to figure out how to do this as quickly as we possibly could to meet the immediate need. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that we need to sort of step back maybe out of the COVID environment and think about how these things are going to be used in an optimal way to advance learning without sort of being under the pressure or under the gun of COVID. So that sort of brings us to where we are now. We made it through our year. All of our campuses continued operation. The Rochester campus, really in an extraordinary way, never had to go to 100% online environment, with the exception of the spring semester in which the initial outbreak occurred, and that was really by mandate of the state across all universities in the state. But fall and spring, we were able to stay essentially open and continue to offer experiences. That was not, again, what happened in Europe or in our Dubai campus, but it was what we were able to do in Rochester. I think I'm going to sort of go quickly to sort of what do I think we need to talk about the future. I think the the sort of the immediate hope is, right, that we're all going to figure out how to use technology in a way that serves us in terms of opening up the world, in terms of how do we best take advantage of this, what we've learned through COVID, how do we best take advantage of this to make sure that we continue to stay connected and continue to build community. And I think Keen Ho and I think King have asked the right questions there, and that is, what is community? And what does the physical presence mean for community, for global connectedness? I will have to tell you, I'm somebody who spent a ton of time on an airplane, and I don't miss it. I am happy now to have the kinds of connectivity that we have using Zoom. I feel like I meet more regularly with our global campus presidents, who I work very closely with. I meet more regularly with many groups of the faculty at our international campuses. So I think there's certainly areas of opportunity. I do think, though, that the student experience is one that we have to be more intentional about, and that we weren't able to be quite as intentional as we would otherwise have been in designing both the instructional experience, ways of engaging across the university, and using our platforms that we have to make that happen. So I think we have a lot to still learn in situations such as this, where we can sort of learn how other people are doing it. I've always envied Jill's sort of one curtain model and way of thinking about their university. We have a far more decentralized approach with our global campuses. They share, certainly they share our RIT curriculum. It's all the same curriculum for specific programs, but we have very separate administrative structures, legal structures. And part of that is we think it makes good sense, in part because of the just different jurisdictional legal issues that those entities face. But I do love that idea in terms of building community. And I think there is going to be, I think, some new ways of envisioning what global community means in this post-COVID environment. So I really want to provide opportunity for everyone to have a chance to ask questions from our international guests. So I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Jim. Some folks have started to pitch some questions in the chat, and we'll turn there in a second, but I want to thank all the panelists for this incredibly rich reflection across a lot of different territory, but remarkable to me in terms of, with really not a lot of pre-preparation amongst us, how there were some consistent themes that were touched upon by all the participants despite different institutional roles. I want to highlight just some things that I picked up. Number one, the theme of customization. So not so much digital transformation or digital mediation, but this notion that the current moment is making us think about the needs of industry, the needs of government, the needs of faculty, the needs of students, and the ways in which we're beginning to imagine pathways that are distinctive and not necessarily bound by disciplinary blocks. This theme of belonging that's been framed as one of community, but also one of the kinds of connection that students need to feel in the classroom, the kinds of connections that scholars need to feel across research collaborations. I do wonder if one of the things that connects belonging and customization is a certain kind of leveling. And by leveling, I'm doing everything I can here to avoid Thomas Friedman flattening language, but whether or not there is some disruption taking place between traditional political economies of a few rich states delivering services to poor states, whether or not the kinds of decentralization that we're all describing means a somewhat more just distribution of knowledge and resources as well. And while Fulbright University Vietnam might look like an outlier in that conversation, I'd argue that the remarkable work they've done to kind of declare their own independence really emphasizes the ways in which they want to be both new and connected, but also distinctive and local. And I also, so two more things. One is the climate change issue. I think it's kind of hovered around what many folks have said, and I think that is deserving of some more reflection tonight. And then finally, I really want to thank Kinho for raising at the end of his presentation the question of student learning outcomes. I think it's perhaps the biggest unknown of the past year. We've focused understandably and rightfully on access, mental health, based delivery of services, but there are probably some downstream effects that that we probably need to work out in terms of what students have actually learned at the given moment. But let me shift over to the question that that Jules had put in the chat earlier on. Are there ways in which institutions thinking about this particular moment, about the emergence into a so-called post-COVID moment, are campus policies around sustainability, campus commitments around sustainability likely to impact how you think about global convergence? We have seen, for instance, at some institutions, a so-called virtual first policy beginning to take shape, particularly with regards to traditional academic campuses. The sense that if there's a virtual option available, in the spirit of keeping to climate change commitments, we should choose that virtual option. We should stay off the plane, as Jim puts it. Jill, can you speak to that first?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of thinking going on about this, Jim, because as Jim Myers said, I think mostly people haven't missed the travel in lots of ways. And I think while we're all sort of keen for that sense of connection, I think it has made us rethink, especially for travelling for those one-off meetings. In Western Australia, we're quite remote from the rest of Australia. So we used to hop on a plane all the time and travel to Canberra or Melbourne or Sydney for a day's meeting and come home, or, you know, a 3-hour meeting and come home. That really won't happen anymore, I don't think. I think we're thinking a lot more about sustainability. In our university, we've got a renewed focus on sustainable development goals and embedding that into our curricula for our undergrads, and actually seeking to put in a range of strategies around sustainability generally. So I think it has made us rethink. Interesting as well, I think that our global campuses have reported at a staff level that they feel better connected to the staff on the campus, because when we were all online, there was equity in that. It wasn't everyone in the room and those people at a distance online. So there've been some positives out of that. Having said all of that, of course, I think while there's certainly advantages for sustainability and for climate change, and I think we've seen, all of us, the images of you know, animals and birds and wildlife really coming back out onto the streets when we actually retreated back to our houses. And I think, you know, those powerful images tell us what we're doing to the world in a sense. So I think we're cognizant of that. But there's a little bit of me that after a year, I didn't mind not traveling for a year. There's a little bit of me that now wants to sort of, you know, come and visit you and, you know, get all energized and excited again, and look to the future in that way. So I guess it's a little bit of both. But we're much more reflective now, I think, about sustainability.
Other panelists want to speak to this question?
I'll jump in. I think that sustainability certainly is a topic that currently a lot of campuses would be talking about. And then switching it online, whether it's a direction that actually we would want to do all the way, I think that can be disputed or discussed. But I think that really the major issue we need to consider is that with this opening up of options available, we really need to think about, like, for example, for all the courses or activities we offer on campus or by institutions, what do we want to achieve? I think that is essentially leading to this intended learning outcome, objective, what it is. and what serves it better. And I think to our surprise, when we first moved everything online, a lot of colleagues would have a lot of hesitance in moving forward. But however, I think that right now what we notice is that not just for the convenience sake, we do notice that a number of activities, projects, and courses, they work much better in such a way, including social service, including a project that we engage in entrepreneur or industry. We, as Jim mentioned, right, suddenly we were able to engage in a lot of these parties more frequently than we used to have, even have daily meetings. In the past, we won't be able to do that very regularly. And with that, in fact, our students benefit. And along the way, students also change the way they think about actually what is meaningful for their study. The same as for our faculty. So that direction essentially is like shaking it up and asks us to think about actually what university education is really about, right? And if we now suddenly identify where those direction is, then we can further triage all this activity into specific platform. And that will make everything even more effective. And I think that's the benefit that we get out of it. And I would say that that's not just the silver lining of this entire episode, but then I think it's a good direction.
I was struck by how all of the participants highlighted that their institutions, either historically or more recently, have a role to play in delivering to students social mobility, that each of us seems to attract disproportionately a population of students that are so-called first generation or new to the college experience. And it does seem to me that one problematic commitment for us will be that many of those students expect us not only to provide them with the economic tools to succeed, but are also expecting us to lift them out of their own provincialism. Many of the students are first generation, have had no opportunity to travel farther than their own home communities. Does the current moment provide us for an opportunity to reallocate resources, to direct more energy into making sure that students continue to have the opportunity for movement while we take advantage of more sophisticated collaboration tools, perhaps to drive our research conversations into the virtual space? Jim Myers, can you start us on that?
Sure. Well, I think it's telling, right, that we, from our research proposal numbers and our funding, during this time has really held its own and been quite exceptional, right? So there is something going on there, I think, where faculty have continued to work and figure out how to engage with their scholarly endeavors during the period of COVID. And as you also know, one of the ways that we've probably all balanced our budget, or at least minimized the shock of all of this, has been by essentially halting travel in the millions of dollars that we spend on travel budgets. So I think you pose a great question, Jim, and I quite frankly hadn't thought about it in those terms, but I do think it is something that is really worth I think a meaningful conversation around. The other thing I'll say is that we've never had the success that we're having right now with the number of students applying for and getting international fellowships. And the students have had time. They've had the time to sit and reflect and write good papers and good proposals. And they haven't been the co-op jobs maybe that they'd hoped to get aren't there, and so they're looking for these other opportunities. Although we did great with co-op, even in a virtual sense, I think they're starting to look at these kinds of opportunities. So yeah, I think it's a great question, and I would hope that would be something that could happen.
Does the tradition, we have different nomenclature on this around the world, but I wonder if the traditional study abroad term, study abroad semester, survives the given moment, or whether or not the kinds of experiments that Kinho described at Fulbright, the kind of move towards shorter term exchanges, visiting students, opportunities to not be so tied to the calendar are also ways to engage our sustainability and our budget challenges. Do you think the study term, the study semester will retain its romantic allure?
Jim, I'll just say on our side, it's that has been the case for a while now, right? We've moved. We have very few students who go on full semester study abroads. Out of the number of students that go abroad, most of them go on some kind of short-term experience, and many of them go on some kind of hybrid experience where that was before COVID. I think this is just going to accelerate that.
Kin Ho, do you have a sense of emerging student desire on that front in Vietnam?
Because of the situation in Vietnam is a little different, our students still fully expect to get an opportunity to spend semesters or even a whole year abroad. And personally, I think that that's an important opportunity for students in Vietnam, because many of them really haven't had the opportunity and may not even have the opportunity to travel outside of Vietnam or the Southeast Asia region if it weren't because of university exchange programs.
Thank you. There is an absolutely fabulous question in the chat from Jude Akpala, asking us to reflect on the standing, continuing, relentless digital divide. We've mostly had the opportunity here to talk about relatively privileged institutions with relatively privileged students able to survive and thrive in the pandemic moment. What responsibilities do our institutions have to extend access? And are there pathways or tools that are beginning to emerge that suggest how we can do it most effectively? Jill, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Look, I think this has been one of the most significant issues for our institution. And I think broadly, as I tune into the UNESCO conversations as well, I think what COVID really has, I guess, magnified or amplified is the fact that our equity students really haven't necessarily had the tools to do what we've asked. And, you know, as we pivoted our 58,000 students fully online, there was a big demand from students who didn't either have a computer, which, you know, in some instances, academics just assumed they did, or they didn't have Wi-Fi, or they didn't have the bandwidth to top up or to top up their Wi-Fi. So the costs really escalated for those students. We put in place, as I said, when I was giving the presentation, financial hardship scholarships, but we also, you know, provided laptop computers and the like. I think as we think about study abroad, and I think our students in Australia will want those opportunities in a much greater number than they even did previously. And I think that's because the whole country has been shut for so long. But we have to make sure that for all of those opportunities, whether they're technological or whether they're experiences, that our equity students have the same opportunity. And so we're looking much more at financial and other supports for those students. I think the other group that were hardest hit that we found were women. So women and girls were harder hit than men. They had to opt out of study to look after children who weren't at school, face to face, etc. And there were a lot more challenges for women as well. So I think those two groups we need to pay particular attention to, whether it's around the learning and the technology, or whether it's around the student experiences.
May I chime in here? I think that's a great question. And I, in a conversation with a colleague, an anthropologist from my previous institution, and I was asked the question that even as some institutions like Fulbright is devoting more resources to help students from areas that may have that suffer from the digital divide, and we provide scholarships for them to get online. The longer term question is, are we going to have two kinds of students? One kind that can afford to get go to a university and get that sense of belonging, that community experience, and the other that cannot, and the best it can do is to go online, and sometimes maybe even with help. Are we creating these two classes of educational experiences for the rich and for the poor?
Thank you. King?
I echo that point. In fact, I think that this digital divide has been a major issue. I think that in all the forums that we've been to, talking about this post-pandemic era and actually how it's affecting our students. I would like to highlight another issues, which is I noticed that even with the availability of the digital support platform, we find that actually students would divide into two groups. For those who are more engaging, in fact, they expand the domain of outreach, and they will be able to even obtain more opportunity in that way. But for those, actually, they are less outspoken, more introvert type of like students. In fact, they get, I shouldn't say forgotten, they are less obvious to be like a presence in a lot of this activity. And so that divide, I can see that it's been widened. And so therefore, if you look at this group, which are really shying away from most of this activity, the kind of mental health issue, as well as the kind of like how they handle the entire university study need to be seriously thought about and be planned. And I think that policy need to be in place in order to help this group and identify this group of students and to offer the kind of support.
Other thoughts on this question? It points back in interesting kind of ways to a comment that Sandy Connolly made earlier in the chat about the authenticity or the possible authenticity of the online experience, and whether or not, as King suggests, it's not necessarily an either-or exchange, that you get an authentic face-to-face experience that is high quality and transformative and liberatory, or you get something else. Are folks optimistic about the quality of technology, the resilience of the infrastructure? I think the majority of faculty on our campus, for every positive story that they have from this past year, they probably have at least one negative story about the ways in which technology failed them, the ways in which they were opened up to new forms of academic misconduct that they didn't think were imaginable. Or they simply found limitations in their ability to connect with students. I think that's probably been the most common refrain that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
The ed tech.
I see that actually.
Go ahead, King.
I see that actually that's a learning process. I think that we simply run into it because of the situation, and certainly we are not really prepared for it ahead of time with enough thought. And so I think that going through the past years or so, actually, we certainly identify a lot of bugs here and there. And so actually we need to fix them. But then I can see that actually it's improving.
It is absolutely the
but
case.
On the other hand, when we are thinking about this internationalization and thinking about like exchange and that kind of things, the focus of the exchange activity may be different. As I pointed out earlier, that actually when a student go to another institution, or when they have that kind of like exposure, what they really need is not necessarily just like going into the class. And the class, I would say that is probably irrelevant in that case, because actually they can easily get access to it through other means. But actually what exactly does that exchange experience represent is when they are in a different location, what kind of exposure they would have. And so for folks who have been involved in all this internationalization, they need to like internally think about how they are going to receive the exchange in students and what kind of things they will be able to offer in order to make it an attractive experience for them. And the same asking about how you identify partners that you can send your students over. It is not about the reputation of the institution, but actually what kind of experience, not about class, not about faculty, but the kind of opportunity and the exposure and possible encounter that they would have. I think that's the most important part.
Thank you.
Can I add in there,
Please.
Jim? I think that's exactly right. I think it's about the experience. But I think what we've found is that digital, as we all know, is absolutely here to stay. It's been accelerated because of COVID. And so we do need to invest in better systems and seamless technology, because you're right, for every good story about how things went online, there's several sort of bad stories about how it didn't go so well. We know, well, we currently have, as I said, about 2,000 students studying offshore with us. We know many of those students will come back when our borders open, but I think a lot more students will stay where they are and want at least part of their learning online. So we do see that the future is probably a combination of online learning, perhaps going to our global campuses and then having a short experience with us on the campus. Whether students ever fully return to that 3 or 4 year degree in the UK, the US and Australia, I think that's debatable. We're all much more used to the technologies, and certainly our students in China are getting very familiar with online learning now, as they are in other countries. So I think it will be interesting to see how this plays out, but we probably all need more investment and strategic planning and vision about what the future is going to look like in a digital world. And that's why we're trying to build our virtual campus, because we see that what we provided in a haste really didn't give that sense of community or belonging that I spoke of. And we've got to engage in building that for those students that will remain online. So whether there are equity students or others, it's got to be a great experience. And then when they come onto campus, that's got to be something special. It is, I would agree, as our speakers have said, it's more than just what happens in the classroom.
Jules, you had your hand up, and I think we've got time for one question.
Yeah, actually, it was a comment. Thank you. I put my hand down. I didn't want to take the time, but yeah, I'm in the architecture program here at RIT, and we were identified before COVID to take our program online. So we worked with a consulting firm who was expert at this. And the biggest takeaway that we got from this firm was how much students today learn from each other. And so when COVID hit, we kind of put some of these practices into play, and really what we tried to do was give them the opportunity to work in teams as much as possible. So it gets to several of the topics that we're talking about here: sense of community, the sense of having students, feeling isolated. But if you can use the classroom to build that sense of community at different levels, you can have teams of 2 and then have study groups of 4 to check each other's work and that sort of thing. So that we even set aside, we try, well, let's have a formal class on Monday and Friday, but Wednesday is the day when you check each other's work, work through problems yourself and so forth. So I just wanted to share that. This is from a company that specializes in this. And I think it's a very powerful tool that we can use to solve some of the issues you're all talking about.
That positive note is the perfect place for us to start. I want to highlight that our terrific coordinator and organizer expert Lindsay McGrath has posted a Qualtrics survey to respond, give us some feedback. We'd love to have that. And I just want to thank everyone who's particularly the folks who are taking time on a Saturday morning to be with us. Our excuse here in Rochester is it's Friday night and we haven't got anywhere to go anyways. So we're happy to be online, but it's Saturday morning. You folks should be outside. I am moved and reassured by how similar our conversations are, how justice focused they are, how sustainability focused they are, and I am so optimistic about the future and so proud to be in conversation with all of you. So thank you, and thank you to the miscellaneous folks who have attended tonight. And I hope we get a chance to meet and know you all better, and hope you become part of the RIT network as well. So thank you.
Jim, thanks for doing such a nice job with the panel. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great catching up.
Thank you,
Look
Jill.
forward
Good to see you.
talking again.
Goodbye,
Bye.
Teen Hope.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye, King.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.